do the introductions out here and just like start in here
and walk out here and do all. Yeah, I like that too. It's better.
That way.
Then we are. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Do you want to fix your hair?
Oh. It's kind of okay when it's wild, you know. It's supposed to be like that.
Artistic.
Yeah. Artist.
I'm going to turn my recording off for a second.
Well, your recording's on, so I'll leave mine on too. So we're just
Cool, cool. Is it about that time? Oh my. We still have 5 minutes.
Okay. Yeah. Let's turn our recordings off because I just wanted to chit chat with you.
Okay.
you just press this button. This is power.
Okay.
Hold it a little bit.
Oh shoot.
Yep. Press it. There we go. That's fine for you. Okay, cool. Yeah. I noticed on your
Excuse me?
that you put the value on.
Can I reach this far? Yeah.
Is there an extension over there?
Yeah.
we go. Cool. Oh, Rima.
Is it working?
Hello?
Yeah. We can't hear it. It's
broke
kind
it.
of good. Like it's just for recording purposes.
Hello? Cool. Test 1, 2, Sydney Parks.
Test 1, 2, Catherine Veneman.
Question. Would y'all want to like start off like sitting on the couch, just like casually talking, pretending, and then
No.
y'all want to keep that? That's fine. I'm being too extra.
Extra's good, but yeah, we'll do how we practice, I guess.
Just wondering, should I stand by my work? Can I?
Where's Amanda? Artist question for setup. Yeah. No, that's
I
good.
really enjoy your outfit today.
Thank you. Okay.
Good to see you.
Susie?
Where to go?
No problem. So let's.
It's like a double. Yes, it's cool. It's more involved than hybrid world. Because we were doing them in person for a long time, forever, and then we started doing them on Zoom, and now it's like, well, how are we going to maximize?
Which is so cool.
Well, thank you. Hi, Eve.
More access, more people.
Can you go through and tell people we're going to start soon and gather around here if they're Hey, Julian. Good. We're going to start. We're going to start soon, and then I would love to catch up with you in a bit.
It's like 12:03.
Since we have our mics on, I'll curtail my chit chatting.
Does it get recorded? Like via like YouTube?
They'll turn it. They haven't turned it live yet, so I don't know if they're recording it until it goes live.
Are y'all ready? Are you ready?
We're gonna wait for the crowd to get in here. I'm trying to gather them. Hi, everyone. We're gonna get started soon. So if everyone can kind of gather around here.
Would you like me to speak louder? I could do it.
Yeah.
Oh, there we got
Someone else. I knew we would have a volunteer. Okay, and I guess we go in our little house now. Hello, welcome to Blaffer Art Museum for day 3 of the Artist Talks for the UH School of Art Master of Fine Arts Thesis exhibition. We hope you enjoyed this latest group, and this is our last day of talks, so welcome. Hi, I'm Catherine Veneman, and this is artist Sydney Parks, who's going to be doing our first artist talk. We thanked everyone a little bit, but as you know, this is the final week of the UH School of Art Master of Fine Arts Thesis exhibition, and this is the 3rd day of artist talks. And today's artists that will be speaking are Sydney Parks, Miriam Donis, Ashita Sawhney, and Jennifer Bootwala, in that order. So we'll start off, we're really pleased to start off with Sydney's work. Sydney Parks is pursuing her MFA, about to graduate, in interdisciplinary practice and emerging forms. She received her Bachelor of Fine Arts degree at Sam Houston State University in Huntsville, Texas, and her post-baccalaureate at Burren College of Art in Ballyvaughan, Ireland. While a student at Sam Houston State, Parks taught a mechanics of drawing course to male inmates of the Huntsville prison system. and she currently teaches painting, drawing, and virtual reality at the University of Houston as a teaching fellow. Parks' artwork has also been included in institutions such as Blaffer Art Museum, Lawndale Art Center in Houston, Dallas Metro Arts Contemporary, Dallas, Texas. Her work has been published in HCE Review, Volume 2, Issue Number 1 in Dublin, Ireland, and the Rice Review in 2019, as well as the Texas, the review in 2019 in Houston, Texas. The artist lives and works in Houston, Texas. So thank you and welcome, Sydney. We're really thrilled to hear you talk about your work.
Great, awesome. So I'll just give like a little info on my art practice and how I work, I think, and then maybe talk about this piece here. So during my MFA, I'm using this time to try to like merge material and like tactile things with digital and technological things, and sometimes like creating a body for that technology, or like using my body in that technology, and like the overarching goal is for them to like merge seamlessly. And yes, that sounds a little crazy, and maybe it is, because it's like impossible for them to merge seamlessly. But I sort of like see it as like going up like this staircase, and like the goal is unattainable, but like perhaps in the future with the way like technology is moving, like how quickly it progresses and what's available to like artists now, like that goal could be attained. So we'll see. But so for like every new piece that I make, I think of what piece of technology like I want to use to like create a haptic experience for people. So like with this one, you've got like the pulse sensor. I had to like learn how a pulse sensor works to like make this piece. So it's like increasing my knowledge about the technology as I go, but also like playing with how it works in like our physical space. Also interested in virtual reality, but that's like another subject. So for this piece here, this is my first installation, I think. I love big pieces and I love immersive things. And so it's my first experience with like creating something that you could like walk inside of and engage with. Yeah, and it's about the grotesque. So while like I do have this goal of like merging technology with material, most of my work is inspired by like personal relationships, like interpersonal relationships, and like physical like feelings, like animal, like carnal feeling. So like trying to like exude that, but also like using technology. Any questions there?
So, sorry, your goal of using technology, how did you get interested in doing that?
So this actually started in Ireland, at the Ballyvaughan Burton College of Art program. I was just like projecting, I wanted my paintings to move. I made like really big paintings, and I wanted them to be immersive. And then like they're huge and it just like wasn't enough. So I wanted them to start moving and like feeling alive. So I started like projecting video onto them so that maybe I could make them move somehow. And that just like started this whole like snowball effect of like what other technology is out there and like how can I do it. So within the past couple of years, Rachel Rosen is an artist who like has been shown and like gotten a lot of publicity. And I do love her practice as well. And she is kind of like in the same mode, but she started as a programmer turned painter. I'm painter turned programmer. And she's like using these like holograms popping off of her paintings. So just like thinking about like all of the things you can do with technology. Yeah. So that's where it started. It started with like video projection on a painting.
And then is this the first work that you've done that's included, can you explain a little bit how this artwork kind of came to be? Because I'm going to ask you about the collaborative nature, but maybe you want to walk us through
Yeah, so this piece came to be because it's a scale it up. I got the scale it up fund from the school to scale up my pink piece upstairs. It's like a bubblegum tumor piece. So that's like this is like the mom of that baby. And that was based on an emotion of like feeling weighted, heavy, having like this thing growing on you that you wanted to like sever, but maybe not because like it is a part of you sort of thing. So you see that here with like all of these like bulbous, like biomorphic shapes, I guess. And they're gross, but they're also like bubblegum colored and kind of like nice. So like creating that tension. And then as you like go in, you can put your hand on the sensor and it measures your heart rate. So you can hear it now because what's happening is it measures like the change in light. So like whenever blood is going through like the vessel in your fingertip, if you like keep it there, it can sense that and it'll start boom, boom, boom with your heartbeat. So you, the viewer, the visitor of this creature, are now being consumed by it, and also like you are the vessel in which it is able to live. So you're like fueling the tumor, and I find that to be incredibly grotesque, but also like really fun and beautiful.
So what motivated you to make this artwork so immersive and participatory? Because you really, you know, the viewer takes a really active part in making the work, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let's see. I think this all has to do with my like not being satisfied with things that are static, but also as a viewer myself, because I look at a lot of artwork and I love art, and I'm very like, whenever I look at art, like I'm like always doing this, like it doesn't matter what it is. And so like kind of like, this is gonna sound bad, forcing the viewer, controlling the viewer, and making them do what I do, which is like move with art. So they have to like duck in, they have to do this. If you really want to engage with it, you have to sit down, you have to move your body to, you know, actually like have this thing come to fruition. So there's a little bit of that like control there, I guess. But like, yeah, creating like a play space for people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think some hands were up.
Listening to you talk about this kind of ultimate goal of merging this physical material structure with the digital structure, I'm just wondering what it's like for you when the deinstall happens, because I know you've expressed it's quite hard to figure out what to do with such a large object. So if the material object perishes, but then you're left with this digital object that can, I guess, like in theory, kind of live forever, is that something that you're interested in, since that seems to be like the opposite of this goal of complete union?
Yeah, that reminds me of like NFTs, which is something that I'm interested in and haven't not yet done. Yeah, I do think about that mostly. Actually, I think about like the digital stuff dying and the physical stuff like being the only thing left. Like especially with the work upstairs, you've got like the video. What if the screen breaks? Like all you have is like that physical thing outside of it. So that's kind of more in line with what I'm thinking of. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. But you know what I have found is that the digital things that I work with, I can like reproduce them differently and like carry them into like other things. So they do have more of an evolution, I think. Yeah.
Olivia.
You mentioned having like very primal emotions being something that kind of motivates your work. And I was curious about, in putting your viewer in this kind of environment, what you kind of hope is the kind of environment you create for them, or maybe what kind of experience like you imagine a viewer having being in this space and kind of fully getting into it.
Yeah. So I don't know like if I've done this quite yet, but the feeling that I would like to elicit is that of like excitement and almost like like, you know the Sublime, where you're like on a cliff and there's like this wide expanse of ocean? Like that feeling of beauty, but also fear. I love that feeling. And there's like a contradiction in that, and I'm trying to like find how to like elicit that contradiction, I think. So, yeah.
Yeah, and you're talking about the raw, powerful emotion and this physicality and digital stuff. And I can see it really coming through in the physical. How do you feel about that coming through this? It's zeros and ones, these digital technologies. I think it's really tapping into that grotesque feeling, animalistic, or not because of that technology.
Like with this piece specifically? So I don't know if this is going to answer your question, but this is how I sort of see it. I see like these digital things, these zeros and ones, as being that like ephemeral thing, or like that psychological thing, that thing that you cannot see but is like definitely a part of you. So in that way, I do think that it is like bodily in a sense, but that, like, I'm not a scientist, okay? Like, I feel like there's some quantum physics over here that we could discuss in that conversation, but that's how I see it. Yeah, things that are happening in your mind that you can't see. Digital stuff can like show that, I think. Yeah. Cool.
How do you see your work kind of in relationship or in conversation with other contemporary artists who are trying to do the same thing as you in terms of merging the body and technology, in terms of like kind of your attitude towards that idea?
Yeah, so, I mean, as an artist, you want to make something like new and original, like whether or not that'd be possible, like I think maybe on like a certain level, like we all definitely want to do that. So like people like Bress, Tony Oursler, Bress makes like video paintings, and they're like on a wall, right? And their videos, and he has like these frames for them. Tony Oursler is like projecting like these like faces onto like objects and like using projection mapping. And so I see my work as being in a conversation with like, and also Rachel Rosen again, with all of these people. But also I think like we're all like on different roads trying to get to the same place. And like I said before, like that merging is almost like impossible, but like if like all of this group, this wide group of people is trying to do the same thing, like it's just interesting to see like if in the future it can physically like be a thing. Because right now, man, like a lot of people are just like getting rid of the physical part and just like coding, you know? I have been prompted to, like, I've thought about this, maybe my work won't be physical in the future, right? Maybe I'll just like sit at a computer in my artistic practice, like we'll just be coding all the fucking time, you know? And making like these things that you only see digitally, but I'm stuck in my ways, and I really love like the feeling of things, you know? So to have like this feeling, I know y'all can't touch it, right? But to have like something that you can touch here, and then to like have like a sensor over here, and like wave your hand in front of it and move that digital image, right? And you feel like you're touching it. I love like having both. So I think in the future, maybe I won't try to merge it. Maybe I'll just like have like this here, it'll be next to each other, and you can like see maybe the merging is happening with like your own body, you know? And that's where like the interactive like installation comes in, and that's like why I want the viewer to like use their body. It's all happening here, baby, you know?
I think that's a great place to end. Thank you. Okay, our next stop, we'll go to see the work of Miriam Donis, this way. Hello.
Well, that was exciting.
Just going to read your bio when everyone gets here.
I forgot to edit for you.
That's okay. Is there something you wanted to add to it?
Where is it?
This.
Oh, yeah. I think the last sentence is probably not
Cut it?
necessary.
Yeah, cut it. Got it. That's easy. Okay, everyone, welcome. We'll just take a moment here.
This.
And if people want red chairs, there's more of them. Okay. Hello. Hi, Miriam. Welcome. Miriam Donis is a graphic designer and illustrator based in Houston, Texas. With a background in brand identity, packaging, and web design, Donis specializes in branding, illustration, and photography. Donis has a Bachelor of Science degree in Global Arts, Planning, Design, and Construction at Texas A&M University. As a current candidate for a Master's of Fine Arts degree in Graphic Design, her work explores and expands the art of storytelling across mediums and cultures. When she's not completing academic projects, she freelances with Vidsy to complete motion graphics for social media campaigns, or works to sharpen her creative skills. So welcome very much.
Hi, thank you for having me. So, welcome everyone at home and present. I just want to say I hope you've had the opportunity to see the work before I speak about it. And to all of those who helped me put it together, this was a big project for me to take on, not only in scale, but in depth, in theory, and just background. So let me dive right in. What I did for my thesis is I created a myth based off of this mask that's supposed to be fox face. The idea is that through this object, magical things can happen, such as the wearer can become, can acquire the graces of a fox, such as cunningness, wittiness, delicateness, swiftness, whatever you can think of a fox having as a positive attribute, this mask could give you as you wear it. And the reason I did that is because I noticed something in the Spanish language that's a little upsetting. And that's the fact that there's discrepancy in the meanings of a word, especially when we go into the slang definitions of that word. So if we think about fox, in English it's just a fox, but if we say it in Spanish, there's zorro y zorra. And zorro might lead you to think of the heroic, legendary El Zorro, but when you say zorra, it's more often than not used as a slur to women, calling them a slut or a bitch. And, so there's this great meaning attached to this word. And what I would like to bring forth is a different perspective to the definition that we give to women. And so I started by creating this idea of the mask and elaborating it through a couple of portraits that reinforce this perspective that I want to give the zorra, and then kind of turning upside down the idea that we have for zorro, which we think of the heroic man, but in reality he's a tried and true, worn down character that we don't really know. So this is the background story to those little portraits. And the writings on it will lead me to talk about the kites behind me. So I decorated El Zorro, which both of these portraits have underlying magazine undertones inspiring their design. Zorro is more of a Mad Comics magazine cover, and Zorra is a creative Vogue magazine cover. And so all of this chatter in the background talking about them and their magazines, you know, he might look tacky, but everything behind him is appreciative or loving, saying my hero, you know, things of the sort. But then everything behind her, meaning all these voices cutting out into her space in white, are more slurs or critiques to her persona, which again, we don't know who these characters are, we're just going off of appearances, right? And despite her being proper, you can see her posture, having, you know, care and grooming to herself, all of these negative aspects are still being put to her persona. And so then we also see this blue writing on there that says, "Soy la que llora por sus muertas," which means I am the one who cries for her dead, but her female dead, muertas. And that is a lyric that I gathered from a song out of the many that are currently forming and helping this movement called Ni Una Menos that's taking over predominantly in South Central America and Spain. It's a legion of women who are stepping out of their houses to speak up in behalf of women who are victims of abuse, of harassment, and, you know, are a difficult subject to talk about, but are certainly not something of the past. All of these issues are still happening, and with my kites, I wanted to bring attention to the fact that it's still happening, right? Now, let me give you a little rundown of what the kites and the mask mean. I borrowed these ideas from Guatemalan culture, which is where I am from, I'm Guatemalan. And I think we all have a clear understanding of how masks work. They usually represent something, and right, as I explained earlier, whoever wears it would possess the qualities of whatever it depicts. And okay, so now the kites in Guatemala are flown and are usually this big or much bigger on All Saints' Day, a day in which we believe that spirits may come down to visit us and want to spend time with us, but at the same time, because of the specialness to this day, you know, bad spirits could potentially also visit us. So what usually happens is that we create these huge kites that are super colorful and beautiful to not only decorate the skies and send out messages, but also repel the evil spirits because of the sound that happens when the tissue paper and, you know, the string, all its components make when they're floating in the air. So that's an old tradition that is still kept in Guatemala, and as of late, the artwork that these depict are usually speaking towards issues that Guatemalans are facing or would like to speak of at the present moment. So it only seemed more appropriate for me to bring it all back together to this idea. And, you know, I might not fly this kite, but it is suspended here, and it's a message for anyone who comes into this space that I hope resonates and awakens a feeling of duty. With that said, there is one kite over there that's in the making that is also next to a collection box in which I'm taking strips of scrap tissue paper, in which, if you feel so inclined, can leave me the name of someone that you feel you would like to fight for in order to create a better world for. I'm particularly thinking any small girls or women that you would like to defend, but I'm not limiting you to what you could actually write down. So if you have the chance, I would appreciate you helping me make a new kite and explore the various legends that I'm showcasing through all of my work. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll have a few questions now. I want to start off just by asking, you know, how has your background in you know, social media and graphic design, and you know, influenced your approach to making art and, you know, as a communicator, conveying a message?
Right, so I feel like the graphic designer has a very special place in the art world and the communications world because we do both, right? So here's, I guess, a good example of portraying that. The quote that I'm showcasing on this big kite, it's used in a lot of marches. It says, "Quiero ser libre, no valiente." I want to be free, not brave. And it's used in a lot of posters that I've seen through those marches, or it's been spray painted on walls to make that awareness happen. And the full quote is, "On the way home, I want to be free, not brave," which is even more impactful. And, you know, they're doing their duty at the streets, and I'm not appropriate. I'm beautifying it and bringing it to another room for a different sort of not different conversation. I'm bringing it into academia. Because of, I think, my formal training, I can do that. Kind of take their voices and lift them up and spread their message in other places. So.
Thank you.
I'm really interested in how, with these portraits in particular, how you're interested in reappropriating, redefining these legends or colloquialisms, things taken from folklore. And I kind of wanted to hear a little bit more from you about what inspires you to borrow from things like folklore or legends, you know, things that we usually think about as fiction, but, you know, are very present in the world.
So, well, growing up, I was immersed in all of this. All the legends are very vivid and present in Guatemala for commercial reasons, but also just cultural reasons. It's very present. So it's always been something in the back of my mind that I think about many times, often. Dare I say, it wasn't until recently that I stopped believing in one of those that really scared me out, El Sombreron. He would steal girls at night by enchanting them with his singing voice. And anyways, well, the thing is that all of these stories, they're legends for a reason, and that's what really attracts me to them. They have still a sense of truthness or, you know, ambiguity that could make them all the more true for all we know. And so I'm attracted to that idea. And then again, it's the ambiguity of the words. We can never understand what anyone means if we know too much, per se. Or, you know, if things are not expressed properly. Things may get lost in translation. Events always change because of how people tell them. That's how the legends evolve and dissolve. I'm just attracted to communication and culture and how they work together. Yeah. Any other questions?
Is there a reason why there are tears on the kite? Because I understand, like, the woman is sad because of what's happening. But how come you chose that approach instead of, like, trying to empower them by making them, like, happy and strong instead of sad with the tears?
So here's, for one, that's a good question. That the kite itself is very loud and happy and proud if you don't know what it says or what it's doing. So I need to remind us that there is that heaviness, that morbidity to the truth. You might say, no, you don't have to, but in reality, we do, because that's the driving force to why we want to create change. Initially, it was inspired by La Llorona, as you might know, but again, I'm focusing her on worrying about her younger sisters, who she might feel like a mother to. And I just felt like that was a strong motif
Sometimes we cry and we're not sure why. Somewhere I heard that tears are the emotions we cannot name. They kind of just happen sometimes. So in reality, I think she's either crying because she's remembering them, perhaps she's crying because she's proud of them for moving forth, or she's just, maybe it's a lot of voices that are too heavy, you know, we're not sure. And I think that's, again, the ambiguity and the beauty to it.
Thank you very much. Thanks to Miriam. Now we're going to move over to the back gallery here, to Ashita Sawhney's work. Welcome, everyone. Ashita Sawhney will receive a Master's of Fine Arts degree in graphic design, and she has worked professionally in advertising and publishing, which sparks her passion for exploration to explore design academically. Working with her copywriters and editors has taught her the importance of content in any creative work. Sawhney explores design, branding, and illustration with an inquisitive and innovative perspective. When not working on projects, sketching with Adobe software training and training is Sawhney's go-to for inspiration and practice. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Catherine.
Yeah.
Thank you, School of Art and Blaffer Art Museum for this opportunity. To start off with, I'm going to read through my notes as an introduction to my thesis, how I led to this, and then I'll talk about my pieces. And this is in regards to how design and graphic design sees spaces. Vibrant and rich compositions embrace graphic design. Environments in marketing, communication, print, web, gaming, and publishing industry. We use color as classification, color to express emotion, to identify, to code, to represent. I want you to visualize this, and I hope you can see these colors. Yellow cap, the red bus, blue monarch, living coral, Martian green, the pink ribbon, feeling blue, recycling bins, metro lines, national flag, stop sign, yellow brick road, and very Perry. Color raises the visual appeal. It binds and holds an entire composition with its visual identity. Does color speak to you? Is it an emotion? Is it an association? But what if we have audience who cannot see the color as it is? When our target audience have a limited color vision, the design misses it. Here, I look back into our design practice to understand the role of graphic design to problem solve. This is the color identity shift that I brought into my practice as I came into the graduate program. At the onset of the thesis, a questionnaire was shared with colorblind audience to understand how they see color spaces. And the responses that I received is how it's reflected in the exhibition that you see today. The questions focused on their color decisions. My fellow design grads, my faculty Cheryl and Yoon, helped me with an extensive critique to narrow down the choices of questions as I was asking them. I want to step back to a few years ago. We start to learn color when we are of 2 years of age. And as we progress through different processes, mediums, we learn color in different spaces that we explore or how we see them. Here, color becomes educational. I sought to bring this into the graphic design practice, not for the colorblind individuals, but educating the full color vision audience on how they can appreciate and explore spaces how the others see it, or others do not see it how we see it. I wish to thank Stephen Evans for a studio visit with G5 Summer Intensive last year that set the direction for the colorblind curriculum. Encouraged by my origami mentor, Sue Ann, and my design faculty, Joshua, I set on to understanding the science behind the art. So going back to the anatomy of the eye itself. And here I worked with Dean Michael Trott. Thank you so much to you and your faculty and your PhD student, Christopher Wu, who walked me through all the steps of how the color vision is tested, how we reach through these understanding between different cones in our eye, so RGB, and if one of the color cones is missing, that's what leads to the color blindness. So if I have a red cone deficiency, I will not be able to see red. If I have a green cone deficiency, I will not be able to see shades that are of green or colors that embrace green. Blue and then grayscale, blue and yellow and grayscale. That's a variation of how color blindness is associated with protanopia, deuteranopia, tritanopia, and monochromacy. I would like to walk us through the book sample that I have. I have 3 samples over here that I'm showcasing, sorry about that, that I'm showcasing that are touch and feel, so you're most welcome to walk through them. And through my meetings with Christopher Wu, I was able to understand and create the graphics in the book, the curriculum that I have right here. So understanding, first off, was understanding this color space, on understanding where and how color is measured for the vision space, bringing in these data specifics in the design spaces, so understanding how many of these rods and cones are there in our eye, and that made me understand what, when one cone shifts, does another cone take its space, or if, so when I'm looking at these data, who are these individuals, or how many of these individuals are affected by this color blindness. So 1 in every 12 men have color blindness. And I may have some right here in the audience who are colorblind. 1 in every 200 women are colorblind. And in the graphics, there is all full color cones coming in, but there is one of these eyes that does not have that color vision. As the book progresses, after understanding the anatomy of the eye, I talk about brand identity. In design spaces, we use a lot of brand association, color connection with how we look at certain brands. So we look at emotion, we look at association with the brand. When you look at a specific color, you understand that it is connected with a certain group or a brand category. And some of the examples that I have over here, so if it's a full color brand, what will it look like in different variations? So I have a selection of all types of brands that are coming in over here that use red, green, or blue in their color specification, and what it looks like to individuals with color blindness. From here on, I transition to what the questionnaire, what feedback I received in that questionnaire. Did it affect the audience, the colorblind individuals, professional and career decisions, or how design can embrace this in being inclusive in our creative spaces. One of the feedbacks that I received, and I'll show you 2 examples over here, aviation, armed forces, emergency services uses a lot of color-coded classification of to use, not to use, what buttons to use for a specific, let's say, an entry-exit point, what is acceptable, what not to do, your AED machines. So here are a few visuals in the book that talk about color spaces as they're used in armed forces. And then I want to showcase what we use in our design spaces when we collaborate with different brands. These are really rich and vibrant in color, but we forget about the audience on who cannot see this. Is there a technology or a process that we can include in our design process to bring about these for our audience? A lot of questions that I do get asked about this is, what is the percentage of the audience that we need to design for them? Let's understand the percentage is not high, but that does not mean that we cannot educate ourselves towards these practices. I'd like to showcase some of my pieces over here, and these are all inspired by my family, friends, and a lot of them watching online, on how they have looked at these spaces and what have inspired me for these crafts. This is a Lego gallery, and if you've seen a lot of Lego works, Lego gallery is a space where creative works is showcased in a smaller space. What I'm showcasing over here is a full color vision, so you see the color wheel and how a red rose looks like, but the same in monochromacy vision. So there is a grayscale color wheel and what the same rose looks like. Here it's important to understand that when we work with monochromacy or low vision audience, a high contrast is quite important to bring about those design spaces. Another thing to understand is if I have the same shade of, let's say, green, blue, yellow, or they are all of the same intensity, when that is converted into grayscale, it'll be that one flat grayscale. So your audience will not be able to see it. That's why it becomes important to understand why we need to design or why are we using those colors. Next I have is a lenticular. Many of you have seen the paper lenticular that I have in the studio. That was my first project I did with Fiona McGettigan, who inspired me to understand different craft and mediums to bring into design space. The lenticular that you see here is inspired by Philip's work at the opening reception that we had at ESS, and he introduced me to parallax printing. This is a 72 lines per inch lenticular, so as you walk from the left to the right and backward, you will see the full color red and then protanopia, which is the red color blindness. Reflecting this into design space, what I'm showcasing over here is design brings in a lot of signage and spaces to work with. So there is, if you pick up a metro line map, it's all color coded. Take the blue line, get off at the red line, and take the green line. Now, if your audience cannot see those colors, they do not know if it is not brought out more clearly in text. So supporting elements and classification becomes very important. And then signages. So today, when you drive back, pay attention to the exit signs, the yellow signs, and if it is, 59, 45, you start to understand with those colors and how they connect. I want to walk to my next example over here. This one is inspired by my colorblind individuals who responded to that questionnaire. And they talked about the spaces in, when it comes to their buying practices. So when you go grocery shopping, today we use, in design spaces, we bring in a lot of sustainable material, and the brown paper packaging is something very common across all grocery stores that you visit. So if you have a brand identity or a product that you're buying in full color, what it looks like in protanopia, that is a red color blindness, in duotoronopia, which is green color blindness, and then tritanopia, which is the blue color blindness. The brown paper bag does not even look like brown in that vision. So when full color audience start to look at these examples and they can compare before and after, it helps to understand and reflect that into our practices as we take that ahead. I have 3 more examples. This one is Picnic 2. Many of you have seen my Picnic 1, which is a concrete poetry again with Fiona McGettigan. And thank you, Beckham, for reflecting on the observation on how this has transitioned from Picnic 1 to Picnic 2 in terms of a dialogue in Picnic 1, where I'm talking about how a parent teaches color to a colorblind child, but now you have a visual representation of the picnic. My other examples here, this is a prototype of an app which is focused on low vision audience. So why does it become important to showcase the contrast? And I want to show you some examples. These are based on design elements. I'm going to show you one about the lines. So if you can see, it's a very thin hairline. It'll be difficult for you to see from there. But what is something in design contrast that we can add to it? So it's a problem solution aspect of it. And instead of a line, it can be a solid fill or it can be a much bolder line. So some of the solutions is what's brought in over here. So one pattern over here, what can be a solution? My last 2 pieces are inspired by a craft work that I started when I joined the program right here is origami. This was with Stephen Hillebrand's class of art seminar, and I got introduced into origami space. And I have a lot of mentors who are watching it online on YouTube today, so I really appreciate your feedback into this work. I learned this with Paul Jackson last month, where he brought about the practice. He's a design instructor and an origamist. And in the practice, what he wanted us to understand is when we bring in origami as a craft, how does it interact with different spaces? So if it's architecture or if it is design spaces for us packaging. What I'm showcasing here is the 4 colors, red, yellow, green, and blue, but what it looks like to colorblind individuals. So what are the 3 different shades in red, green, and blue color blindness, what it looks like, and the same adapts right here. What you see right here on my augmented app, and I'm thankful to 3 of my faculties, Victoria Gerson, Joshua Smith, and Daniel, to introduce augmented spaces to me, to understand how, as technology evolves and as generations are exploring these newer technologies, how can we bring that into our own creative practices? So once the but first origami piece is scanned onto the Envision Artivibe app, what you're looking at is the 4 color wheels transition from full color to protanopia, duoteranopia, tritanopia, and the grayscale, what that color wheel looks like. With that, I want to thank my family who's here to support me today and everyone watching online, all my mentors, my fellow grads, the Blaff Art Museum, and the School of Art. Thank you.
All right, to start off with the questions, your practice obviously contains a lot of research in it. How do you go about in setting your problems, which problems to tackle?
To understand the problem, I need to understand who the audience are, and that's something that we do bring in all our design practices. And in this case, I collaborated with the optometry school here at University of Houston. So they had, they shared their information on what are these steps or tests that are being taken care of. And as I got on to writing my thesis, a lot of fellow grads they came up with, they have their students or they have their family and friends. So the problems come in from the audience, the kind of issues that they are facing. And then how can I bring it to understand from their perspective to make work out of that.
Okay, thanks. Other questions? Miriam? Or Olivia, sorry. Who?
Adrian.
Oh,
Adrian.
yeah.
As a designer, are there colors that you would propose that we use?
I am so glad you asked this question. So, and this I learned through working on this thesis. So the rarest is the blue color deficiency. You'll see a lot of social media, which is in blue, and that's why I'm wearing blue today. If I was wearing red or a green, audience would not be able to see it. So blue, yellow is rare. Monochromacy, which is the grayscale, is even rarer. So that's like in 1 in a 30,000 or a 50,000. And that's why we are not catering in our design spaces to them, but that does not mean we should not. We should at least be aware of it. So yes, blue. Olivia.
I wanted to ask what initially inspired you to consider accessibility in colorblind practice?
I attended a workshop at Rice. This was with the Blind Association. They had a symposium a few years ago. And when I attended that, I'd already worked in the industry. I'd moved from advertising to publishing. And when I attended that, it made me realize that there is an audience that we are not designing for, or who will not be able to see this the way it's designed. From there on, in 2014, Adobe introduced Daltonization process in their software. So they introduced protanopia and duoteranopia across all their softwares. And last year, they introduced triteranopia on color.adobe.com. So it has been an evolution for me in my practice, alongside looking at how technology is embracing this process into all the spaces. So today, gaming industry, if you play Minecraft or other games, or even your laptops allow you to change the vision, or you download apps. So like when I'm practicing, I work with an app, or I work with Daltonization process to understand how to view these colors on why the way they're viewed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we will conclude this 3-day series with the work of Jennifer Bootwala, which is right on the other side of the room, so everyone kind of just turn around and we'll regroup. Can you get some more chairs? That's cool. Hello. We'll just take a minute for everyone to kind of turn around. Okay, welcome. Thank you very much, Jennifer. Jenn Bootwalla is currently a Master's of Fine Arts candidate in graphic design at School of Art at U of H, and she found design at the intersection of photography and writing. Bootwalla is a maker, educator, and an aspiring human who enjoys exploring creative methodologies, histories, and materials. She views her practice as an ever-expanding collage of call and response. And she's based in Houston, so welcome.
Thank you, Catherine. Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to talk to you today about my thesis work, Soft Graphics, which is on both of these two walls. And in this project, I'm exploring knitting as a graphic design medium. So first of all, I am just a knitter. I've always kind of considered myself a crafter, and the pandemic, like so many other crafters, I think really gave us an opportunity to sit with our practice and think about our materials and just invest lots of hours in these oftentimes like repetitive craft practices. So I had amassed quite a few sweaters at the end of 2020, and I wanted to know how I could take my love for knitting and bring it into my graphic design practice. And interestingly enough, graphic design and knitting do share some commonalities. Even though, you know, we may tend to think of them as being opponents in this showdown between analog and slow making and digital and fast making, they do share some foundational similarities. One of those is actually just kind of in the etymology of the word. So the word digital comes from the Latin word digitus, which means fingers. And of course, fingers are, you know, our computers for crafting with our body. And also a big thing that struck me when I was considering how to make this relationship was the grid. So for graphic designers, the grid has so often been really a god to designers, and graphic knitting is very much based on a grid system. So anytime you're developing a pattern, you are working on a grid system. So I was thinking about this grid system in knitting and thinking about all of the unique properties that knitting has. And one thing that I find to be one of those properties and I'm especially interested in is this idea of softness, which I'm going to expand upon a little later. But I was thinking about how could knitting undermine or transform this grid system by questioning it or softening it. And before we get too far into this, I thought it might be useful just to give you a very brief history of knitting and sort of how it's distinguished from other similar crafts. So the first knitted object that's recognized is a sock fragment from ancient Egypt and in the 11th century. And then after this in Egypt, knitting kind of moves throughout Europe and makes it to America. So I do just want to acknowledge that the history of knitting is very Eurocentric, and there are so many practices and cultures and artisans and makers all over the world that have just really been underrepresented, and I can't tell you about them because I honestly am still trying to find that information for myself. But there's so many beautiful, deep fiber practices that extend beyond knitting. So speaking of knitting and defining as is interchangeable. Knitting uses 2 knitting needles, or 2, they look like wooden sticks, whereas crochet uses a single hook. And then the big thing that I'm interested in with the difference between these two is that when you are knitting, all of your stitches are open-ended, and so it's sort of this like indefinite process that allows for change in the moment. You're not finishing these knitted stitches until the very end of your project. When you're crocheting, you complete every single stitch before you begin a new one. And crochet also, it comes after knitting. I believe crochet came more in the 1800s, so significantly later than knitting. So what are these like formal and conceptual qualities that attracted me to knitting that just made me so desirous to include it into a graphic design practice? I want to just read some of these off to you, and I'm still compiling this list. I find that I'm constantly thinking of new material affordances of knitting. So the first one is that knitting really is a way to visualize labor, although all people knit, knitting does historically have strong ties to women's labor in particular. Knitting speaks to an overarching history of craft, which opens up questions for long-held debates about art versus design, craft versus art, and the hierarchy and value of these practices. Knitting is very much rooted in a communal and collaborative practice. Knitting tends to be something that is passed down through communities, through close relationships, and there are also, there's so much teaching that happens within the community and collaboration. And speaking of that, knitting really prioritizes people, so both in its collaborative making, but also in its utility. Thinking back to that first sock, knitting really started out as making things for bodies. And that's important to me because I've been thinking a lot about bodily autonomy, especially as it relates to the DIY movement, which is something that knitting and all crafting has been in close association with, especially over the last 20 years. And with this DIY movement, there's often a desire to subvert the mainstream. Knitting is a record of process, which I find just really beautiful. Oftentimes, actually every single time I'm knitting, I have to pick pieces of my hair out or pieces of cat hair because fragments get wrapped up in the fabric itself. So it is a very literal example and archive of one's process. It's very inclusive and accessible. You can literally knit with chopsticks. I'm sure there's a lot of TikToks of people knitting with very odd objects, but it's easy to learn, it's inexpensive, and it's just very accessible. Knitting is self-sustaining. And when I say that, I mean if you think about a practice like sewing, you do need multiple components. You need fabric to sew together through the thread. But with knitting, you're creating the fabric in tandem with the object, which I find is something that's very unique to knitting. I love the fact that knitting is resilient. Even the thinnest, most seemingly fragile yarns become almost unbreakable once they've gone through this transformative process of being knotted together. And knitting is infinite. I've been thinking a lot about how knitting can be unknit and reknit, and that's a practice that people have used during times of economic depression, where you could just literally unknit a sweater that you made for one child and reknit it for another child. So it has so many possibilities. So going back to this idea of softness and what's really drawing me to this exploration, I find softness very interesting, both as this physical quality. I love the idea that we can touch this, that most people, even if they are not a knitter, have some kind of association with knitted items, and that it does evoke a sense of the body or a feeling of perhaps warmth or familiarity. But in addition to this physical property, I'm also very interested in softness as an idea or perhaps a design strategy. And this is something that is ongoing, but some of the things I'm thinking about is how softness can be an alternative to our current institutional structures, how softness can provide this interstitial space, a space where things can adapt, where things can expand to include other things. They can stretch, they can wrap around and create space. Softness is a form of inquiry, a kind of way of questioning maybe what's real or what's true in the translation process of one medium to knitting, with this idea that things can be constantly unmade and remade. And softness as an imperfection. So softness is something that through this imperfection really honors the human experience, and softness as an acknowledgement. So with all of that in mind, if we have time, I was just going to walk you very briefly through the projects. So to start this off, I wanted to set some parameters for myself. And I knew that what I wanted to focus on was the idea of labor and how visible and valued labor is. And so with that in mind, I set some knitting sort of design parameters, and I wanted to explore 3 functions of knitting. The first is gauge, which is behind me. And gauge is basically just referring to the size of the fabric that's produced when you are knitting. So the stitches, the actual motions that are used to create these pieces are all exactly the same, but based on how thick or thin the yarn is and how large or small the needles are, the visibility of the final object will change. So something that's knitted on very small needles is going to produce a less visible object, whereas something knitted on large needles is going to produce something with much more visibility. And then thinking about how long and how much work goes into these processes, even though this is bigger, it took less time to knit than this, which is smaller. So thinking about gauge as this way to consider different identities, different positions, and different forms of labor and how they're represented and valued in the world. The next thing I wanted to think about was texture. So this piece has actually, speaking of Ashita's work, it has a lenticular quality where when you're viewing it straightforward, the shapes are obscured, but when you move around and see it from the side, you begin to see these abstract geometric shapes. And yes, this does involve color as well, but this technique also works with just one color. It's really the texture that is allowing that. So with this, I was really thinking about this idea of what we can see, what's visible. And the title comes from a Virginia Woolf novel, Orlando, and I felt that was important to bring in because it's also wanting to think about different types of identities, and if anybody loves Orlando, you'll get that. Over here, these 2 pieces, my guiding principle was thinking about color. So just how color on its own can relay information. And these 2 pieces are, I guess, very special to me because I encountered a scholar, Dr. Elizabeth Farfon Santos, who is a former University of Houston faculty. She actually left her tenured position because as a woman of color, she had very negative experiences and she felt she had to leave for her own personal mental health. And she tweeted about this, and when I reached out to her to ask how I could share her story, the idea of a QR code came up. So as I was working through that narrative with her, I became really curious about how knitting could perhaps translate into something more straightforwardly acknowledged as a graphic design product, which is infographics or data. So these 2 panels represent, just by color only, the color represents the amount of women of color who are comprising the student body in this panel, and then the other panel is representing the number of women of color who are on faculty. And the color, of course, is meant to be cougar red, so thinking about how just color can convey that visual information. So that's a brief overview. I don't know what the time is like, but I will maybe leave it at that, and then I'd be happy to discuss anything else more in depth.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. we have time for a few questions, but I guess just to start off, what is the kind of, I thought it was interesting when you were talking about softness and in terms of it as being an actual space to communicate a message, especially then when you explained the kind of ideas behind some of your works. Can you elaborate on that a little bit in terms of one of these works?
Sure, yeah. So this is all like very in process, which is exciting to me. So I may not have all the answers, but I really appreciate the opportunity to think through this. So maybe with softness, thinking about type, we can think about type design. So type design is of course integral to graphic design's identity and presence in the world. And for this project, I created these charts myself, and it was very interesting to see how to take something like type, which is really sacred, and when you're in design school, you're instructed not to interfere with the type, that the type is this thing that has already been perfectly crafted and you should not be manipulating it in any way. Of course, that rule does get broken. But when you're translating something like that into this soft material, there's just no way to have a one-to-one. And so this was very interesting to see how, despite my best intentions, these letter forms were affected by the medium, and not only affected when I was knitting them, but also when I was, stretching them and mounting them. So that's one thing in particular I'm thinking about with softness. And then also thinking about softness with these pieces, and thinking about, I think these pieces are really interesting because for me there's this juxtaposition of wanting to treat this data in a humanist way by using something that is soft, that connotes maybe care or, again, community, and connotes labor, but it also is using these very cold geometric forms. So how softness is kind of interacting with something that might be its opposite, and what happens when those two things come together. Mm-hmm. And I'm not really sure yet. This is, kind of a test to see what the answers to those questions are. So,
thank you. Olivia.
Can you speak to the decision to kind of have like the unfinished almost quality of these pieces, like with the strings hanging down? I think I see some things over there.
Yes. So I'm really wanting to convey process, like just as a sort of literal reminder of the work that goes into these things. I did not want to trim any of these. Every time you begin a project, finish a project, and then with color work, when you add in a new color, you're left with these additional strings. And so the sort of proper practice would be to weave them all in on the back and hide them, so there's no evidence of that. And I knew from the beginning that I wanted to show this just to really emphasize this idea of process. But with this piece in particular, I knit all of these hanging threads and I let them sit for a week. And then when I installed it, I unknit them because I wanted them to have this kinky quality that basically speaks to that idea that not only are these indicative of process, but they're also bringing about the idea of yarn as this kind of place of infinite possibilities, and this place where things can be questioned and undone and remade in a new way.
Any other questions?
So you talked about the grid at the very beginning. Do you think that your relationship to the grid or your opinion of the grid has evolved during this process? That's a great question. I think as a graphic designer, our relationship with the grid is always sort of conflicted. I especially associate the grid with sort of white men who really, popularized the grid. So I think there's a feeling of maybe wanting to push back against the grid and destroy the grid. But ultimately, it is very appealing. So I think navigating this idea of softness is maybe going to lead me to a place where I can use the grid in a way that undermines it, but also I take what I want from it. So I'm still thinking about that, but it is very interesting. And there's definitely one thing I'm thinking about too, is there's like a lack of control with knitting, because the stitches are never going to be perfect squares, and even the fiber itself, like the fiber can get a halo on it depending on what the content is, and that can sort of obfuscate the grid and make those lines a little less harsh.
Okay, thank you so much,
Thank
Jenn.
you.
Just a few final words. Thank you all so much for coming to the artist talks for the 44th annual UH School of Art Master of Arts Thesis exhibition at the Blaffer Art Museum. The exhibition is on view and through Sunday, this Sunday, the 11th. So, you know, spread the word, final chance to see the show. We really congratulate all of the students who spoke today, starting with Sydney Parks, Miriam Donis, Ashita Sawhney, and Jenn Bootwalla, as well as all of the other exhibiting artists who have spoken earlier in the week: Haoua Amadou, Marcelese Cooper, Noelle Dunahoe, Liz Gates, María, Jacinta Majías, Tiffany Nesbit, Brent Reaney, Doug Welsh, and Isabelle Zimmerman, just to list them all. So thank you. We're so proud of your accomplishments, and thanks to our colleagues at the School of Art as well, and all of our staff at Blaffer. So thank you all for coming, and please stay for conversation with the artist. Congratulations.
I couldn't tell it all. Thank you. You did so good.